All right, welcome again, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about a little bit more about Flask and how to use it to build a web app, chapter 5. So today's class, we're going to finish chapter 5 and then, ready for chapter 6. And like I was telling a second ago, that it's okay that in this chapter, we're not learning anything new in regards to our Python knowledge, but it is good because we're applying it in a web app. It might not be forensically like a DFIR thing, but that's okay. We're going to talk about plists at the end part of the class to kind of round up and give it that applicability to our work, right? So let's get right to it. For this chapter, we were working on how to take our little project, Search for Letters, where you wrote a phrase, and it will tell you the vowels within it. How to make it interactive, how to make it web-based, so you can access it through a browser, okay? And to do that, we introduced the concept of Flask from last class, which allows us a module that has, that has different functions that we can use for that purpose. Flask gives you like a web server, a little web server on your device, and then you can send data and receive data. And I will not discuss in details. Now, if there's questions, I will try to address them and let me know in the chat. But in regards to how the web portion works, right? What's a post? What's a get? What are redirects? What are error messages? I don't have plans to discuss it in class, but if it's needed, we can try to do some of that. The point being that, in your work, this will be the case. You will be working on an artifact, and you might have to extend yourself in regards to, well, this artifact is in the context of a web app. What's a web app? I see some error messages from a log. What do those mean? Oh, it's a log from a web application. 400 means errors, 200 means success, right? So you have to extend your knowledge to make sense of the artifact you're working on. You might be working, for example, and we'll see that in further chapters, this application will create logs, and you have to understand the technology behind the log to parse it appropriately. And actually, I'll give you a quick example of a case of an individual doing malicious activity, a disgruntled employee. And the way to solve that case was to look at the log applications, FTP logs, the logs from the web server, to figure out who did what and when to the server that damaged it, right? And we were able to locate the suspect and complete the case, okay? But it required extending myself and understanding what the logs are telling me beyond just parsing them, right? So I think that's important to keep in mind, even if this chapter is not like super forensic-y, okay? So let's go to it. We learned that we need to import from our module these different functions. Flask, we discussed, right? It handles the web serving processes, and then render template and request, okay? And the reason for that was that to make the code repeatable, more efficient, what Flask requires from us is to have two folders, one called static, one called templates, right? Static will have the CSS, and oh, I shouldn't, there we go. Yeah, the CSS, which is the code needed for to give the page its flavor, how it looks, right? What type of fonts we're gonna use, their size, how the tables are gonna look, how many points or pixels, right? On different margins. I mean, how it's all gonna look. And that's pretty convenient. Back in the day, you had to do that like in line as you're coding your HTML. Now with CSS, you just put those definitions and they apply to your HTML pages, okay? Again, not Python, not forensically, but good to know. So that's that. We have how the page is gonna look on CSS, so we're not gonna deal with that anymore. And then templates. And we had a template that's the kind of the base of the web pages. We're gonna be requesting data from the user and then giving the user the result, right? And what I did, and I like to do that every single time, I wrote everything down. The book gave you a link to download it, which is nothing wrong with it. But when I type it, I make mistakes, and then that helps me understand what the mistake was and how to fix it, okay? So as you're learning, I recommend you type stuff down so you can make mistakes and then figure out how to fix them, okay? This is our main document. as we learned through in the book, this double squirrely brackets here, our module will look for them, and we'll try to, we'll treat this content here as a variable that needs to be filled, that needs to be presented to you, the contents that need to be presented on the screen. Same here, we'll look for block body and end block to show you data that corresponds to those anchor points, okay? Again, it's fairly straightforward, at least based on the reading of the book. If this doesn't make sense, I'd be more than happy to explain, because that's what I'm here for. All right, let's look at the other one. Entry will be the first page we're gonna work, that will be presented to the user. And notice how we're saying extends base HTML, because we want we want our page that we present to the user to start this way, with doc HTML, the HTML, with the title. We want to include all this at the beginning. Then says block body, end body. So we go to entry. We're gonna go from block body on the top all the way to end block and present it to the user. And since we're extending base, then we're gonna show the user the end, body and HTML. You see that? So we're merging our base HTML with our entry HTML, okay? Based on these anchor points. The book doesn't call it anchor points, but I like to call them anchor points. And it shows to the user a form, okay? And I'm not gonna explain the line by line, because you're gonna see it in a second, or you saw it already in the book when you did the code. Okay, so we got that. And the last one is results. So that's the returns that the user will get when after they do their query for our script. So again, same thing, we extend base HTML, we get the top of that, we go from body block to end block, present this to the user, and then add the end. All right, so let's run it. All right, when we ran it, we noticed that we get what we were expecting to get, right? The page where the local page where we'll be working with our script. And notice here it says we start with stat, debugger is active, right? And we learned that in order to be able to run debugging, we need to call the app with the debug option or flag or argument as true, okay? And what the debugger does is it allows us to make changes to the code. And the moment that we save our script or our document, it refreshes and it restarts the web server and shows you the changes, right? If you don't do debugging on, you have to stop the script, save the file, stop the script, and then restart the whole thing. The debugging mode lets you do that, and also debugging mode gives you some more messages here for you to consider, okay? So now we're running, and I'm gonna use, do I have Safari on here? Let me see. Yeah, let's try it on Safari. Alrighty, so I'm gonna go there, and here it is. Notice the background, notice the fonts and all that. That's controlled by the CSS file in the static folder, right? So we're gonna request, let's put here DFIR Python, right? And we hit do it, we get back, let me see here. It search for AES and we get only an O. And you say, well, why didn't I get the I? As you learned from the previous chapter, we're just looking for lowercase vowels. We're not looking for, for the uppercase. So it only shows you, right, what it found, only an O. So this works, right? And how does it work? This part we discussed last class. We discussed decorators, right? Which pretty much whatever you put on your decorator will be affecting the function right below it, right? And this decorator is gonna be, pretty much executing all this code if we hit the search for URL in our browser, okay? And the method will be post, and we'll talk that about in a second, okay? Same thing down here. These two decorators, 1 and 2, apply to the function beneath it. And I will discuss the second one first. Why? Because this is the one that will be executed when we call the script. And why? Well, because this last year is the root, and in a web server, this is like the main page. When you go to let's say google.com or google.com/ is the same thing. Okay. And we learned in the chapter that originally we wanted people to go to the entry page to execute this code, right? So if I go here to, instead of, let me put here, if I put here entry, oops, I'm not typing, entry, right? Oh, I put on double, entry, there we go, right? Notice it took me to the main page, which is fine. If I take that entry out and just go to that root, same page, it works, right? So the decorator here is pretty much saying, look, if you hit the root there, like the beginning of or the home of our page, execute this function down here. If you go to the entry URL or location, also execute this. And this is good because it prevents us from using redirects and having extra code. If you need me to explain the redirects, I'm more than happy to. I will refer you to page, let's see here, to page, I can't find it right now. I thought I had marked the right page, and I did not. I marked the wrong page. But I'll find it for you, and I'll put it in Discord. Oh, I found it, I think. No, I did not. All right, I'll put it on Discord. There's a page that explains the redirects, right? So we want to do as much as we can with the least code possible. We want to make it efficient. We want to make it easy to understand and lightweight. And that's a design purpose, okay? So when our web server detects that somebody's, a browser is requesting the home page or the entry page, it will notice that. Our decorators will have our code execute this function, and it will say, okay, run the entry page and render the template, right? Go and show me entry HTML, which I showed you already, right? So it goes and shows, before it shows entry HTML, does this extension to show you what's in base, shows this to you, and you get the screen you see over here that you saw already in right here, okay? If you're not familiar with HTML, again, that's a little bit out of scope, but this code here, HTML code, is exactly, or generates what you see all the way here, okay? That's what it does. Perfect. Now, when this is shown, right, that entry page, and you place your data here and you type whatever it is, vowels, and put some vowels here that you want, and you hit this button, right, which is the submit button, and you hit it, right, something's happened behind the scenes before you get to this point. What happens? Well, if you look at the code here, where's entry? There we go. Okay, if you look here at your form, right, where you put your data, when you hit your button, the submit button, right, which is here, the input, it will go here to this location. It will go to from the root of the web page, and it will go to it will send the information to the search for URL, right? It will try to do that, okay? Which makes sense because if you look at our script, you see here, all right, search for. You notice that? So the screen is shown to the user types the data, and by the act of hitting do it, is trying to get to the entry page. The search for page right here. So at that point, this gets executed and it says, okay, the data, the method you're gonna use to access that data is the post method, okay? Right, we're gonna be able to show the data to the user. That's what we want, okay? And to receive the data that the user typed, we're using the request function here. And request, based on our reading of the book, is pretty much takes the data that the user typed in the form and puts it in a dictionary. And the way to access that data is by using the dot notation. So you're gonna go request.form and the name of the field that has the data that you want. For that to make sense, we go back to entry HTML, and you notice that the phrase is placed in this variable called phrase, and whatever letters is gonna be placed in the letters here, okay? So those values get transmitted and are placed in that dictionary using the request function. So we want them. So we're gonna, in this case, we're gonna use the same name variable because it makes sense. Phrase and letters to receive that from the user. All right, title, we're gonna put here your results. You can put whatever you want, but this makes sense based on the script that we're doing. And then we execute our code that does our magic, right? We provide the phrase and the letters that we're looking for to our function that we discussed last class, and we get the results. And originally, we were just returning results that gave us the vowels that were identified, or as an empty set if we found nothing. Notice, and you might remember from 2 classes ago, that you can only return one thing. You cannot return more than one object. So in this case, we need all of these objects to be able to provide them to the user. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to use return the object render template, and instead of that object, right, we want where we're going, and we want all the results we got from our we want the phrase that the user provided, the letters that we were looking for, in this case the vowels, the title that's up here, and the results, what our function provided. We want it right here, and we provide that to results.html. Okay, so what do we have in results.html? There we go. It takes, again, extends the base, puts the title, and notice here the phrase. It will show the contents of that variable, show the contents of that letter, show the phrase here, the letters here, and the results, right? And that's what you get right here, right? The phrase and the letters and your result down here. And here's the phrase again and the letters again, okay? All right, so that's pretty much it, okay? It's a lot of moving pieces, and I get that. One thing I need to mention and not forget. Notice here how the Flask web server or framework is handling, all this logging for you, which we'll deal with further in the chapter. But it's interesting, right? It says, okay, get, and it tells you from where. In this case, it's the local computer. It tells you if it was successful, if there was an error, right? And these codes have meaning. And for your cases, and I know many of you have had to deal with logs, this has meaning and has timestamps, which is pretty interesting. And if we put this into a file, based on what you know from Python so far, you should be able to pull the data out and sort it, make a report, and we might do that in the future. So keep an eye on that. All right. As a quick review of the end of the chapter, if number one, if this made sense, give me a 1. Let's start by that. Let me see here. Okay. Are there any questions? And it's okay if there's questions. I said, well, I'm not going to touch this, which is, it's fine. But if there's a question, I will touch in anything there's a question, like what's happening in some of these things. Like render template. This is something that's handled by the Flask module, right? I mean, the book doesn't go into it. And to be honest, I don't go into it either. We just know that to render, we need to import this. And that's okay, right? You can always take this code and open it and look at it yourself to get more sense of what it does. We're just here learning how to use it. So if you ask me, how does render template work on the inside? I wouldn't know unless I look at the code. But in regards at least to decorators, the functions, how are they being called? Are there any questions? Okay, I'm gonna go in 1, going twice. Okay, perfect. All right, so the last bit of class, and this will be fairly straightforward. Let me start this web server because I don't need it anymore. It's working with plists, okay? I have a plist here from iOS, and it's a really important plist. It's called lastbuildinfo.plist. And if you open it straight up in an editor, you will see the following. You will see here that, well, first of all, we'll discuss that in a second. You'll see here some text that you can actually read, right? Like for example, OS version 3.1, the build, and this might be useful for you, right? In my case, I use it because my coding, I need to figure out what the OS version of the iOS device I have, so I can then do the proper manipulations of the databases that it has. Because, as you know, different iOS versions means that some databases have different fields than another iOS version. Or maybe there's a file that exists in an iOS 9 that does not exist on iOS 12 or 11 or whatever it is, okay? So I might need to know what the OS version is. Now, I'm not gonna open this file like this every single time and look at it. That defeats the purpose of coding. So what we're gonna do is, let me close these. I'm gonna show you a useful library called import plist lib. I'm assuming it's for library. And we import it, and that's it. You know already how to open a file. So I'm open the last build info.plist. I'm opening it as a read-only file, and the B means binary, okay? Because it's not a flat file. That's why it looks kind of squiggly when we open it in our editor. And in my case, I decided to use the variables fp, you can use whatever you want, as our file handler. And then I'm gonna take the contents of that file, right? I'm gonna load them in my the plist library. And then what the plist library is gonna convert it or deserialize it into something I do understand, okay? I want you all to type on the screen what data structure is the plist turned into when I hit run. I want you to actually type the word. What is that data structure? It is a what? Yep. Perfect. Perfect. It is a dictionary. Perfect. And we know how to deal with dictionaries at this point, right? We can go and iterate through either the keys, the values, both. And notice here how easy it is to say, okay, I want the key iPhone iOS. I'm sorry, well, that's not the key, that's the product name. The product name is my key. Oh, it's an iPhone OS, right? It could be iPad, it could be whatever, right? So product name might be useful for you. The one that I really care about is, where is it? Is the version. So I'm gonna look for product version, and this will be what I'll be working out of to do my operation. So the homework for today is really easy. Add to the script and just make sure that you're able to pull out every single key and value in it. That's it, really easy. Just a little practice from previous things that we have learned. But notice how this plist library makes it really easy to deal with all the contents within that plist. And if there's further binary content, let's say here in the value field, you can pull that out and do further operations. And I haven't looked for a BP list to use yet, but over the weekend I'll find one that has that, and I'll show you how to do it verbally, so you kind of have an idea conceptually. If you have other binary data inside of it, what I do is I take that out, and then I write it to the file system, and then I open it again to see what's in it. It's kind of like going into the thing, right? And then I deal with it appropriately. BP list, some of them are NSK archive, if I pronounce that correctly. Let me see. Which gives us another set of complications, but we can deal with those. NSK, it's NSK. I'm gonna write it wrong and see if Google saves me. NSKeyed archive, there we go. NSKey archivers, archiver is a type of data format that you will see in BP list, okay? And I will show you some ways of dealing with those, because those are the ones you're gonna be seeing more and more and more of, okay? Any questions on how to get to a data inside of a plist? If there's any questions, you can say it. If it makes sense, give me a 1. Awesome, awesome. And that's what I got. That's what I got for you all today. For next week, the plan is to go, and I will put the pictures for whoever has the PDFs, right, or the Kindle versions. I'll show the pictures shortly in the Discord. But for next week, so the idea is to do the whole of chapter six. And let me see here the calendar real quickly. Let me stop sharing my screen. Let me stop recording, because that could wrong button. There we go. I think I stopped sharing. Did I? I think I did. Okay. Let me stop recording then. There we go.